Hi all, welcome back. So this is our next session, second session for second day under the Web Tools and Complementary Technologies track. So let's welcome Michael to the stage for his session, Everything You Need to Know About Content Security Policy. Thanks, Michael.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming along. Thanks for the introduction. I'm not as energetic or enthusiastic as some of the other presenters, so I'm not going to make you respond when I say good morning. I'm just going to get straight into it. We've got a lot to cover, so brief introduction. I'm Michael. I work at Previous Next. I'm a developer. Been involved with Drupal for over 15 years. You can find me at Strelan or on Drupal.org or on Slack. And today we're going to talk about content security policy. So I'll give you an overview of what that is. We're going to talk about what considerations you might need to think about when using it in Drupal, or if you're using things like Google Tag Manager. Then we'll go over how to deploy and monitor a policy, and then review some observations we've found from implementing a policy on a large government website with lots of tracking and various other scripts. So what is CSP? Does anyone here know what content security policy is? Have you heard of it? Hands up if you heard of it, and hands up if you've implemented it or you're using it. Okay, great. So everyone's got, most of you have some familiarity. Hopefully, maybe we can learn something new, or maybe at the end you can tell me what I've misunderstood about it. So let's jump in. So CSP is a HTTP response header that's sent from your web app or your server to your browser, and it basically instructs the browser what content sources it thinks it's allowed to load. So this includes scripts, styles, images, fonts, video, audio, etc. And the policies, it comes from the server or the app, but it's enforced by the browser. So depending, if you're using a really old version of IE, you've probably got bigger problems, but it's not going to enforce the policy. So fortunately, most modern browsers are mostly in sync with how they interpret the policy, but there are some nuances there. But the point I'm trying to make is that the server is not actually enforcing anything, it's just suggesting it. And so what does it do? Maybe you've got a pen test report back to you and says, okay, you need to put in a CSP. You don't know why, but they tell you you do. Or maybe if you've got a CSP already, maybe they're telling you what's wrong with it, what you need to fix about it. So basically, the policy is there to protect or add an additional layer of protection against cross-site scripting, which is one of the most common vulnerabilities that you see in like Drupal CVEs. It protects against clickjacking, and it can also help to upgrade insecure requests, although there's a few other ways to do that too. So let's have a look at an example. So MDN, Mozilla Developer Network, has a lot of great documentation on CSP. You could probably, if you want to, just read that top to bottom, and then you don't have to be here today. But I'll try and summarize it instead. So this is the first example that they give. So it's very straightforward, very basic. But by default, we only allow content from self, which is the current domain that we're serving the content from. Except for images, we also allow them from example.com. But I thought I'd take a sticky beak and have a look at the policy that MDN is actually using. And expectations and reality don't really align. So it kind of makes me feel a bit more like this. So let's break it down, because it is actually digestible if you know what to look for. So the format of a CSP is made up of a number of fetch directives. So this is script source, style source, image source, various other ones, and then default, which is the fallback for any directives that you haven't included explicitly. Then for each directive, you can use one or more keywords to describe the content that can be loaded. So none, if you don't want to allow scripts at all, just set it to none. If you only want to serve your own scripts from .js files on your domain, you can use self, or same for images or styles, etc. And then there's a couple of unsafe ones, and they're prefixed with the word unsafe because they're not recommended. So if you have inline scripts on your page, they could have any content. You have no idea what's actually in them. And basically, if you allow this without any other protection that we'll talk about later, that's considered unsafe. So if you have those scripts and you're not using the unsafe inline keyword, they'll get blocked. Same with eval. There's a few like JavaScript functions that are considered unsafe, basically like parsing strings and then evaluating them as if they were scripts. They'll get blocked too without this keyword. Then as well as keywords, you have source expressions. So that might be a host or a scheme or a wildcard, or a host and a scheme and a wildcard. So star.example.com, https example.com, or data for like a data URI. So for example, for a base64 encoded image, you might use data URIs. And then a couple other ones, which are nonce and hash, which I'll talk about shortly. So coming back to the MDN example, if we look at their script source directive, they're allowing scripts from CodePen, Google Analytics, Google Tag Manager, Stripe, maybe they've got a payment gateway, and then a couple of SHA-256 hashes, which we'll come to soon. And then, of course, self, because they want to serve their own scripts. And then another keyword we'll talk about later, which is report sample. The style directives is a bit more simple. It's self, but then here they're also allowing inline styles on their site. So inline scripts are considered more risky than inline styles, but with what you can do in CSS these days, it's still not recommended to allow that. I'm not going to go through all these other domains, but the connect directive is for fetch requests, AJAX requests, where it can connect to, frame source for iframes, images for images, media for audio and video, and then everything else they're just allowing from self, with the exception of object source, which they've set to none. I don't know if anyone uses object tags today. Back in the day, we used to use them for Flash animations. I hope no one's still doing that, but it's probably used for something that you should probably just block. So I said we'll come back to hashes. So essentially, instead of blanket allowing an entire domain, especially if it's like CDN.js that serves up thousands or I don't know how many libraries, you just want to allow one individual script. So in this example, I've got down the bottom, I want version 5.1.0 of reveal.js. I can include the SHA-256 or 512 hash in the policy, and then that one script or the content of that one script will be allowed. That can be difficult to manage because it's subject to change. If there's so much as a white space change in the script, or it's minified, or there's a new version of it, that's a new hash. So probably only recommend doing that if you've got a way to make sure that the hash in your policy is dynamically updated to reflect what's in the script. But also you need to trust that the changes to the script are, things that you do want to allow. So a much more dynamic approach is to use something called a nonce. A nonce is a random string that gets dynamically inserted into your policy. And then anytime that same string is added as a nonce attribute to your script tag or your style tag, if that matches the policy, then that script is allowed. It can also be inject. So if you have a script that injects other scripts into your page, that script can propagate the nonce when it's loading the other script, and in turn it'll allow multiple scripts to be loaded that way. But to protect you against cross-site scripting, that nonce needs to be randomly generated for every request. So there's a few different strategies that you can use to implement your policy. You can use an allow list like MDN uses. This can be tedious to maintain, and it's very broad, so they're allowing anything from CodePen. So it's probably not the best approach for everyone. You can use a nonce-only approach. So basically, for scripts, we allow a nonce and we allow self. But that can be difficult. So if all these external tracking scripts that you get asked to add, they all have their own ways of injecting other scripts. And if they're not set up to propagate that nonce, then that's not going to work either. So you kind of have to go digging and find out, what are the other scripts that are being included and either allow list them. Or there's another approach which is recommended on web.dev and contentsecuritypolicy.com. And that's to use this other keyword, which is strict dynamic. And so essentially you load the first script with the nonce, and then that says, if you have strict dynamic, it says any other script loaded by this script is also allowed to be loaded without having any manual propagation of that nonce. So moving on to some Drupal considerations, I thought I would install Drupal CMS on DDev, just the vanilla, followed the instructions, and enable a really simple policy. So I've modified the Nginx config that comes with DDev to add this header. So basically, we're only expecting to serve content from our own domain. I don't think there's any inline scripts or styles. If there are, we can control them, we can fix them. So let's see how that looks. So if we load up the home page, we're logged in. The page to the left kind of renders okay. If you look really closely right up next to the dashboard, the icon there is not loading. And if you look at the browser console, there's a handful of CSP violations. But it gets worse. If we go to edit the page, CK editor is completely broken, and you have dozens or maybe even hundreds of violations there. So you probably can't read the violations at that font size, but if you inspect them, they tell you what directive is being violated and potentially what line of code is violating that. And we can modify the policy to basically allow all the content that is being served. So this is what I came up with. So default is still self. Images, we are now allowing data URIs, which will allow that dashboard icon to load. And then we're allowing that unsafe inline script and styles. So how does that look? Much better. CK editor's there, the icon's there, and there's no errors in the console. But we are relying on those unsafe keywords. So pretty soon you'll figure out that Drupal probably needs a bit more of a dynamic policy than something that's hard-coded in your Nginx or Apache config. And this is where the CSP module comes in. This allows you to have a configurable policy. So you can specify expressions, domains, hashes for each of the directives. But it can also dynamically add sources depending on your library's info YAML files. So out of the box with Drupal CMS, I noticed the better exposed filters module loads a script from CDN.js. And this is a bit of a problem because we're now blanket allowing that domain cdnjs.cloudflare.com, which, as we talked about before, has thousands of other scripts. So they're all now allowed to load. Fortunately, there is an open issue to move away from using that external script. So that will solve that problem. The contrib module also supports dynamically generating a nonce for every request. This might be cached if you're using Varnish or another CDN, AWS CloudFront or Cloudflare. And that might be a problem, but depends who you ask. It might also not be a problem. I'm not going to go into all of that now. Maybe if there's time at the end, you can ask about it. But there's a link there discussing why it's not a problem. If it is a problem, there are much more complicated approaches to address that. But also the CSP module doesn't fix everything. So as we saw, we had to allow unsafe inline for scripts. And out of the box with Drupal CMS, we can see the navigation module has a hard-coded script tag or inline script tag in a twig file. So, because that's hard-coded in the twig file, the module can't add the nonce to it. You need to use like the hash attached approach. So there's an open issue to fix that as well. Who uses Google Tag Manager? Most of you. So oftentimes we get asked by the marketing department, we need to track things in Google Analytics. Please can you add Google Tag Manager? And then, weeks go on, months go on, and then all of a sudden your site's loading in Hotjar and it's loading in chatbots and it's loading in all these things that marketing has decided that they need. And, well, maybe, it'd be good to have a better understanding of what's going on in there. But anyway, Google provides some documentation, which is pretty good on how it thinks you should implement CSP for GTM. There's a link at the top there. But the problem here is they suggest there's hundreds of domains, literally hundreds of domains that you might need to add to your policy. So Google Tag Manager, Google Analytics if you're using that, AdWords, DoubleClick, depends what you're using. You might need Google Fonts. But then they also suggest, depending on what you're using in GTM, you might need to add every single TLD that Google owns. And at last count, that was almost 200. In practice, I'm not sure that's entirely necessary, but I guess in some situations it might be. With GTM, as I said, whoever controls it can inject inline scripts into your site. They can also load external scripts, Facebook tracking pixel, LinkedIn Insights, Hotjar. But Google recommends they provide a nonce-aware version of the GTM script that you've put in the top of every site you've done, basically. And then GTM, their dynamic script loader will inject that or will propagate that same nonce into all of these other scripts that are loading, including the inline scripts. You do still need to add domains to your policy for connect source, image source, frame source, and basically anything that's not a script or a style. But yeah, the link up here gives you a lot of examples depending on which services you're using. And then for Drupal, we've got the Google Tag Manager module, which comes out of the box in Drupal CMS. And currently it doesn't yet support the nonce-aware version, but once again, there's an open issue for it. There's a merge request there. It looks like it should work. I haven't used this module, so if you want to try it, please do review it. Please say, hey, this works, let's get this in. So you might be wondering, I've got this existing site, I've got all these scripts, I've got all these styles, I've got all these external dependencies. I want to deploy a policy, but I don't want to accidentally block something that shouldn't be blocked. So how can I craft a policy that basically finds the balance between allowing what the marketing team wants and blocking what the security team needs you to block? So you can pass that pen test. So you can do local testing, like before we looked at the browser console, but your site probably has many pages and page types that have different templates. Maybe there's thousands of pages. As I said, different browsers might interpret the policy differently, so you have to test on every browser. And then depending on what privacy settings your browser has, it might have differences in how it interprets the policy as well. In Google Tag Manager, it might be targeting particular users, or you might just not have access to the same GTM environment in your local environment. And so this is where reporting comes in. So the CSP or Content Security Policy HTTP header, you can append the suffix -report only. Everything else about the header looks exactly the same. It's truncated here. I've just got an ellipsis there. But then you add another directive for the report URI. Well, actually, report URI is deprecated, but it's supported in all current browsers. There's a new API called Reporting API, thank you, where you basically specify a CSP endpoint. And yeah, it's similar. You can read up on it. And then there's that report sample keyword that we saw before in MDN. And basically that says if we have a violation for an inline script or an inline style, include a snippet of that script in the reports that's sent to the endpoint. That way we can try and track down what is actually being blocked. So you can submit your reports to a SaaS offering like reporturi.com, which is paid, but it provides filters and dashboards and notifications and stuff like that. You can use the reporting API Drupal module, which will log to dblog or syslog or monolog or whatever you're using. But that could be dangerous because if you have a lot of violations, it's a post request to your site and you might end up DDoSing yourself. Or if you want to roll your own, you can provide a custom URI and you can log it off somewhere else. This is what a report looks like. Basically, it tells you, so I added a YouTube video out of the box in Drupal CMS with my policy that I had before. And this is the report that I get. So it tells you the blocked URL is youtube.com. The directive is frame source. Okay, so that tells me I need to update my policy. So in frame source, we're now allowing youtube.com. And it's usually a good idea to go and look up YouTube docs and see if there's anything else that you might need to consider. Like maybe you need to allow other scripts from YouTube or whatever. Okay, so moving on to some observations that we've seen from implementing a policy. It can be hard to reproduce many of the violations that you see. So sometimes they point to an inline script that simply doesn't exist. Or perhaps a directive that you should have allowed, it's just seemingly ignored for some reason. I'll talk about that soon. Facebook pixel, tracking pixel. We noticed that it was trying to access your local host on thousands of people's machines. And that's a bit scary. Why is it trying to do that? We should definitely block that, by the way. I found a thread about it. It probably was an intern accidentally shipped the wrong thing. But maybe they were actually trying to access your local host. I don't know. I don't want to make accusations. I don't want to get sued. And then we found some weird things with LinkedIn insights. And it wasn't just us because we found this article of other people finding the same problems. But basically, we were allowing px.ads.linkedin.com. But in some cases, not in our case, but in other people's cases, it was being redirected to px4.ads. And we didn't allow that in our policy. So we ended up doing *ads.linkedin.com. We also found that there's a content type mismatch. So something that was saying it was an image was actually loading a script, or the other way around. I can't quite remember. But basically, instead of just allowing it in the image source, we had to allow it in the script source. Whose browser is this? Does anyone go to, help their parents and I can't log into my email, and you load up their browser and it looks like that? Well, according to our reports, this is what all of your browsers look like, because we see so many violations where the browser extensions are advertising themselves, hey, we're trying to do something and it's being blocked. Antivirus or safe browsing plugins, rewriting URLs, doing all sorts of stuff like that, or rewriting headers even, rewriting your CSP header perhaps. And then there's just random injected scripts that they must come from the browser extensions. I don't know where they come from, but they're just scripts that do not exist, but they're appearing in the logs. So this is happening in your browser. So some observations from one particular date last year. This is Facebook Pixel, 22,000 violations where it tried to access WebSocket on your local host. 17,000 violations that advertise themselves as extensions. 8,000 violations of inline eval data, stuff that we're not using, so it comes probably from these extensions. I'm running out of time, so I'm trying to get through it quickly. These are those antivirus. Some more extensions. So Honey, this is a discount shopping. It finds coupons on sites that you visit. Shopping.qantas.com does the same thing. And when you add these extensions to your browser, this is what you're agreeing to. So they can read your PII, your financial information, your location, your history, your user activity, and all of the website content and all of the sites you visit. So, sorry, I'm getting sidetracked. Don't install these extensions. So in summary, reports are noisy. You need to filter out all of this junk to get to separate the wheat from the chaff. there's some links here of other people that have found the same thing. So gov.uk is great because they open source a lot of their infrastructure and stuff like that. They have this CSP reports to Firehose, which is an AWS service that basically ingests logs and does stuff with it. But if you look at that, you can see all the things they're filtering out. And it's all the same things I mentioned before, like random URLs, browser extensions, etc. And then Twitter, they found the same thing 11 years ago. So things haven't changed. So if I can leave you with some lessons, if you can include CSP early on in development, it makes it a lot easier, because when you go to add, I want to add, I don't know, open read speaker, that's something we've used. You know straight away, oh, my policy blocked it because it didn't work. And you can adapt your policy. It's much easier to add things to it as you go, rather than going, I want to cover everything in one go to an existing site. Collaborate with your marketing department so you know what's going on in GTM. If you can host scripts yourself, like rather than them putting inline stuff in GTM, that's a lot better. In general, this is good even without CSP, is just don't load things from CDNs when you can serve them up yourself. There's less DNS lookups as well, but it's just better to have control of everything. And hopefully you can use a good reporting service or roll your own reporting service so that you've got visibility into what's going on. I think we've got time for some questions. Going once. Okay, over here. Looked into it, but it's not something that we've done yet. Yeah. So I'm very interested in looking more into what gov.uk is doing. But yeah, it's definitely going to need to involve filtering stuff out and like being able to see like, you know, what's actually useful. Anything else? Yeah, so we do that, but okay, yeah, sorry, repeat the question. Did I use the Google recommendations for Nonces? Yes, so we're doing that, but then we also, you know, they have all these images, like I mentioned, images, connect source, all of that sort of stuff is still, you know, you need to manually add that to your policy. So I'll also add, we're not using Google tag module, we just have a custom script that injects it. And so we're using the CSP module with the like attached libraries, which will add the nonce in that way. And we do the same wherever else we're using an inline script or an inline style, we make sure it goes through the attached processor with the CSP module. Anything else, wherever we can, put it in a static JS or CSS file. And one more thing on that note is if you have like onload, onClick, any of those attributes, they get blocked by CSP. So you need to instead use like an event listener to attach these script or these handlers. Do we have time for one more? Yep.
So there was a directive was like report only.
Yep.
Something like that. So if you set that rather than the content, so this was.
Yep. Yep. So the question is, what does this header do? Basically, report only header. It won't block anything. It will log to the console, and if you provide a reporting endpoint, it'll submit to the endpoint. So you could use this with just console and do the manual clicking around, and that might be a good starting point as well. Before you've got actual traffic hitting the site. Lee. No. So the question is, did the CSP module used to include the reporting aspect of it? So the CSP module does support the report URI, but that's the deprecated one. Whereas the reporting module is the same maintainer, by the way, he supports both modules. So basically the reporting API is a new thing for reporting, not just CSP, but there's couple other things that are, in HTTP spec or whatever, that this module aims to support eventually. But basically, because of browser support, you kind of need to have both report to and report URI. And they appear differently, like in your network graph in your browser, because I think you can see report URI, you can see a post request go through, but report to is kind of just silent and just happens in the background. So that's a bit, voodoo magic. I think that's probably all we've got time for. Thanks, everyone.